We are commencing legal action against Mrs. Meghan Markle, her televised allegations, particularly the Oprah interview.
The palace did not shake when the decision was made. It went silent. Behind closed doors, King Charles read the final protocol assessment, lowered the page, and made the choice no one expected him to make so publicly. Meghan would no longer be included in selected royal events, not delayed, not quietly discouraged, removed. And once that order left the king's desk, every corridor in the palace understood one thing: this was no ordinary family dispute. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles sat alone with the file open before him, and for several seconds, he did not turn the final page. The protocol assessment, a formal palace review used to judge whether royal rules were followed, had reached a conclusion too clear to soften. Meghan had breached palace protocol during a private reception by ignoring restricted seating, crossing into a controlled guest area, and holding an unauthorized conversation with a diplomatic guest after a direct warning from an aide. The king understood why this mattered. Royal events are not ordinary gatherings. They are carefully managed moments where seating, access, and conversation protect the crown from confusion, embarrassment, and political risk. One wrong movement could become a message the palace never meant to send. Meghan received the news without warmth, without a call, without even the mercy of a private explanation from the family she had once entered with hope. A formal message arrived instead, shaped in cold palace language, telling her she would no longer be included in selected royal events. She read it once, then again, and the silence around her became heavier than the words themselves. Meghan knew what removal meant. It meant her name would vanish from guest lists. It meant cars would not be assigned. It meant doors that once opened through family connection would now answer only to royal permission. Charles kept his hand on the last page because the final witness statement had changed everything. One courtier had described the reception not as a misunderstanding, but as a direct challenge to the chain of command. That phrase cut deeper than any complaint. The chain of command, the palace system that decides who gives instructions and who must follow them, is the quiet spine of royal life. Break it once, and the whole room feels the crack. Break it after a warning, and the king can no longer call it accidental. The decision was framed as a constitutional household matter, meaning it was tied to the working order of the monarchy, not only to family emotion. Charles needed that distinction because he was not acting only as a father-in-law, or a wounded man trying to hold together a fractured family. He was acting as the monarch. Still, the cost showed on him. He lowered the paper slowly, as if the file had taken something from him. Meghan had been removed. The order had left his desk. And now every person closest to the king had to choose whether to stand behind him or try to soften the blow. But before the palace could absorb the force of the order, the people at the center of it had to face what each of them stood to lose. Every royal crisis has a public face, but this one had private scars. Charles was not only acting as sovereign, Meghan was not only reacting as an outsider. William, Catherine, Camilla, and Harry all stood near the blast radius, each carrying old pain into a new decision. The removal order was about protocol on paper. In reality, it forced every person around the king to reveal where loyalty ended and self-preservation began. Harry read the message first, and his anger came before his words. He stared at the formal wording as if the palace had turned a family wound into a legal notice. The removal order, a written instruction that changed who could attend official royal events, did not speak like a relative. It spoke like a gate closing. That mattered because royal events are not only dinners, services, and receptions. They are public signs of acceptance, proof of who still belongs inside the working circle of the crown. Meghan understood that instantly. Her exclusion was not only about missing rooms filled with officials. It was about being named as a risk. Meghan took the message from Harry and read it with a stillness that made the moment worse. She did not shout. She did not rush to defend herself. She simply absorbed the cold shape of the words and felt the humiliation settle in. The palace had not called her daughter-in-law. It had not called her family. It had treated her as someone to be managed. Harry watched her face change, and that was the moment his anger sharpened into something more personal. He could fight a decision. He could argue with Charles. But he could not erase the way Meghan had been made to feel outside before the world even knew. Charles felt the weight from the other side of the palace, where duty had become its own kind of punishment. The king knew he was standing between two identities. As a father, he understood that every formal sentence sent toward Harry would deepen the fracture. As monarch, meaning the person responsible for protecting the order and public role of the crown, he knew one confirmed breach could not be ignored without weakening every future warning. Charles had not only removed Meghan, he had chosen the institution over comfort, and even Camilla could see what that choice had taken from him. William paused before entering the private meeting and measured every word before he spoke. The prince knew the danger. If he sounded too firm, the decision would look like revenge. If he sounded too soft, the palace would look divided. Catherine remained quiet nearby, but her silence carried force, because several aides believed the breach had touched her directly at the reception. She did not need to accuse anyone. Her stillness was enough. Camilla watched the room with careful eyes, aware that old wounds were feeding new decisions. And as family reactions hardened, one earlier incident began rising from the shadows, pulling everyone back to the night when protocol stopped being tradition and became a warning. The breach did not begin with shouting. It began with a chair, a guest, and a conversation that should never have happened without clearance. At the Windsor Commonwealth reception, a carefully arranged evening shifted when Meghan crossed into a restricted diplomatic seating area after being told the section was closed. What seemed like a small movement across a room became, in palace memory, the point of no return. Meghan had been warned before she moved. A palace aide had stepped close and told her the section was closed, not as an insult, but as a command built into the evening's design. The Windsor Commonwealth reception, a formal gathering where royal figures meet guests connected to Commonwealth nations, carried more weight than an ordinary palace event because Charles wanted it to show stability, unity, and discipline before international observers. Every chair mattered. Every greeting mattered. Every short exchange could signal respect, distance, approval, or tension. Meghan heard the warning, but she also felt the old pressure of being managed, watched, and narrowed into a role she believed the palace had never allowed her to define for herself. Catherine noticed the shift before the room fully understood it. She saw Meghan move toward the restricted diplomatic seating area, and her expression tightened because she knew what that movement meant. Restricted seating, in plain terms, is an area reserved for certain guests because their conversations, order of greeting, and access to royal figures must be carefully controlled. Catherine did not rush forward. She did not cause a scene. But she understood the damage instantly. If one person ignored the structure, every person assigned to protect that structure had to react without making the reaction visible. That was the cruelty of palace order. Success looked effortless, but panic had to stay hidden. Meghan held the unscheduled private exchange with a senior guest, and the moment cut through the room like a quiet alarm. The guest appeared uncertain, and a courtier later noted in a documented account that staff had to adjust the movement of the evening within seconds. That courtier did not describe chaos. The courtier described something worse for the palace: confusion. Confusion inside a royal reception can become diplomatic embarrassment, because guests begin asking who is allowed where, who speaks for whom, and whether the crown is fully in control of its own room. Charles learned the damaging detail later, and it was not only that Meghan had crossed the line, it was that the line had been named to her before she crossed it. The king could forgive awkwardness. He could survive tension, but a warning ignored in front of senior guests turned a private frustration into a royal problem. Then Catherine's name entered the aftermath, and everything changed. Charles realized she had been forced to carry the strain of the moment quietly, while staff protected the room around her. And once the breach reached Catherine, the quiet machinery of protocol gave way to a conversation no aide could soften. The room was small enough that silence felt like pressure. Charles sat at one end, Meghan at the other, and the space between them held years of grievance. No press office, no aide speaking in careful phrases, no family member stepping in to translate pain into diplomacy. For the first time since the breach was confirmed, the king faced Meghan directly, and every word carried the weight of exile. Charles had asked for the meeting himself, and that choice made the moment colder. He did not hide behind the palace office. He did not let a secretary carry the pain for him. The protocol review, a formal check of whether royal rules were followed during an official event, had confirmed the Windsor incident could no longer be dismissed as confusion. Meghan had entered a restricted area after a warning. She had held an unscheduled exchange with a senior guest. The king knew why this mattered. If instructions inside royal events became optional, the monarchy would lose control over the very rooms that were meant to show its discipline. Harry waited outside, and that separation spoke louder than any announcement. He had been told the conversation was between Charles and Meghan alone, between the sovereign and the person named in the file. Sovereign simply means the reigning monarch, the one with final authority over royal duty and household order. Harry understood the meaning immediately. He was not being invited to defend her. He was being made to wait while the crown spoke directly to the woman it had judged. He stood there with anger rising in him, but the closed door denied him even the comfort of interruption. Meghan sat upright, but the wound showed in her voice. She told Charles she felt judged before she had ever truly been heard. The king listened, and for a moment, his face softened, as if the father in him wanted to answer before the monarch could. Then he placed the protocol document on the table. The sound was small, but the meaning was brutal. He told her the monarchy could not function if direct instructions were treated as suggestions. Meghan challenged the punishment, asking why one evening had been turned into a public exclusion. Charles did not raise his voice. He said the decision was not based on one incident alone, but on a pattern that had made controlled events harder to protect. Meghan rose too quickly, and the chair moved sharply behind her. The sound carried into the corridor. Harry heard it, and his body tightened before anyone spoke. Inside the room, Meghan looked at Charles with hurt sharpened into disbelief. Outside, the Duke understood that something had broken beyond repair. When the meeting ended, the king did not call him in immediately. Charles remained behind the closed door, alone with the document, while Harry waited long enough to understand the truth. The decision was already sealed. But the confrontation only exposed the surface. The real power behind the decision was moving through older rules, private loyalties, and the cold authority of the crown. A royal decision rarely belongs to one person alone. It travels through advisors, private secretaries, senior family members, and the invisible architecture of precedent. Charles may have signed the order, but the palace system gave it shape. Behind him stood a machinery built to protect the crown from emotional storms, and this time, that machinery decided Meghan was no longer a complication. She had become a liability. William stood by the window before the meeting began, his jaw tight, his words already weighed before they left his mouth. The prince knew the danger around him. If he supported the order too strongly, it would look like revenge. If he opposed it too softly, the palace would look divided. His office had been consulted because future reign stability was now part of the calculation. Future reign stability simply meant the palace was thinking beyond Charles, toward the next chapter of the monarchy, and the rules William would one day inherit. That mattered, because every decision made now could become a test for the future king. Meghan's removal was not only about one event. It was about whether royal discipline could survive family pressure. Charles entered the room with the tired stillness of a man who had already lost something before the decision was even finished. Senior household officials had backed the order, arguing that royal events depend on predictable conduct, controlled access, and strict guest management. A senior household official is a trusted palace figure who helps run royal schedules, events, and rules behind the scenes. These people do not shape public emotion, they shape consequences. One courtier placed a list of upcoming events before the king and explained that Meghan's attendance would now require special restrictions at each gathering, separate seating checks, extra guest controls, additional warnings, quiet supervision. The logic was cold, and that was what made it powerful. Removal looked cleaner than constant watching. Camilla saw the cost on Charles when he returned from those discussions. She did not need him to explain every detail. The queen consort understood the look of a monarch who had been forced to choose order over peace. Charles moved more slowly than before, and she watched him set the file down as if it had grown heavier in his hands. Camilla knew why the decision mattered. The crown could survive criticism, but it could not survive the appearance of losing control inside its own rooms. Still, she also knew the personal damage would not stay outside the family. Harry would feel it. Meghan would feel it. Charles would pretend not to feel it until the silence proved otherwise. Charles paused over the guest list for a major service, and the room seemed to tighten around the pen in his hand. The guest list, a formal record of who is invited to attend an official royal event, should have been ordinary palace business. This time, it became something almost unbearable. Meghan's name sat there in black ink, still attached to the place she had once held. The king looked at it for one long moment. Then he crossed it out himself. No speech followed. No one in the room tried to soften what had happened. Policy had become personal. A rule had become a wound. William watched the revised list leave the palace office, and he understood the fallout would not begin as a headline. It would begin quietly. A car not assigned. A briefing not sent. A seat left empty. A door closing without explanation. And the first person to feel those doors close was not the king, not the prince, and not the courtiers who wrote the file. It was Meghan. The punishment became real when it touched the calendar. A name vanished from a seating plan. A car was not scheduled. A briefing packet was not sent. Meghan did not need a speech to understand what had happened. The silence around her was enough. The palace had moved from warning to consequence, and with every missing invitation, the distance between royal family and royal institution became impossible to deny. Meghan sat with the updated schedule in front of her, and the coldness of it struck harder than any argument could have. The Remembrance Service, a formal event where the royal family gathers to honor sacrifice and national memory, was no longer open to her. 2 palace receptions had also been changed. A palace reception simply means an official gathering where royals meet guests on behalf of the crown, and attendance at those rooms is never only social. It tells the public who is trusted, who is included, and who still stands close to royal power. Meghan saw that her name had not been moved. It had been removed. Harry remained on the list, and that was the detail that turned pain into fury. He looked at the schedule, saw his own access preserved, and pushed the paper away as if it had insulted them both. The Duke understood the design immediately. The palace had not shut the door on him. It had left him standing inside, while Meghan stood outside, forcing him to feel the split every time an invitation arrived. Harry said the decision was meant to isolate her and keep him controlled. Meghan did not answer at first. Her silence told him she had already felt the same thing. Meghan read the message again, searching for one human sentence, one sign that the family behind the institution still existed. There was none. The wording avoided apology. It avoided comfort. It avoided anger too, and somehow that made it worse. A palace aide confirmed through a documented briefing note that the removal was event-specific at first, meaning it applied to selected appearances rather than every royal gathering. But the same note left room for wider restrictions if another breach occurred. Meghan noticed that sentence immediately. The palace had not only punished her for the past, it had placed a warning over her future. Harry felt the choice closing around him. If he attended without Meghan, he would look as if he had accepted the king's judgment. If he refused, he would turn a controlled consequence into a wider family rupture. Charles had preserved his son's access, but that mercy carried its own sting. Meghan saw it too. The crown had not simply closed a door. It had built a narrow passage and asked Harry to walk through it alone. The paper stayed between them like a verdict neither could tear up. Harry's anger softened into something more dangerous: resolve. He knew advisors would tell him to wait. He knew palace language would tell him to stay calm. But the separation on the calendar had forced him into a private choice. He could confront Charles as a son, or protect Meghan as a husband. That choice led him away from advisors, away from palace phrasing, and into the one conversation that could still change the emotional meaning of everything. For once, there were no titles in the room. No majesty, no duchess, no press strategy. Just Charles and Harry, father and son, separated by a decision neither of them could pretend was only about protocol. Harry arrived ready to defend Meghan. Charles waited with the exhaustion of a man who knew he could not undo the order without weakening the crown. The silence between them said more than either wanted to admit. Harry had asked for the meeting after Meghan's removal from the Remembrance Service became official, and he came in carrying more than anger. He carried the shock of seeing his wife cut from the royal calendar while his own place remained untouched. The Remembrance Service, a national ceremony where the royal family publicly honors those who served and sacrificed, mattered because attendance there was not casual. It was a sign of respect, belonging, and public trust. Harry knew Meghan would not see her absence as a scheduling choice. She would see it as rejection, stamped with royal authority. Charles did not let aides sit between them. That decision changed the tone before either man spoke. An aide, in simple terms, is a palace staff member who manages messages, schedules, and delicate conversations so the family does not have to face every painful detail directly. This time, there was no buffer. Harry told Charles the order felt like punishment dressed as procedure, and his voice broke when he said, Meghan had already been made to feel like an outsider. The king looked at him for a long moment, and the silence almost became an answer. Charles admitted the decision had hurt him, but he did not retreat from it. He told Harry that love could not override the rules that kept the monarchy intact. The crown, meaning the institution of royal power and duty beyond any one person, survived because people believed it could control itself. If a confirmed breach carried no consequence, every warning after it would sound weaker. Harry heard the logic, but logic did not comfort him. He wanted a father. Charles was speaking as a monarch. Harry leaned forward and demanded to know whether Meghan was being erased. Charles finally revealed what had been left unsaid. He had chosen a limited removal instead of a permanent ban. The punishment was severe, but it was not designed to end every future path back. Meghan could return to selected events only if she accepted the breach, agreed to future restrictions, and stopped challenging direct event commands. Harry understood the narrowness of that path. It was not forgiveness. It was conditional survival. Charles watched his son absorb the truth, and for the first time, the anger in the room softened into grief. Harry did not agree. He did not forgive. But he understood that the king had left one door unlocked, even if the handle was cold. The emotional temperature shifted, but nothing was safe yet. What began in private now moved into the open, where newspapers, broadcasters, crowds, and critics would turn a family wound into a national spectacle. By morning, the palace could no longer control the silence. Britain woke to a story that felt both intimate and historic. A king had drawn a line, a duchess had been removed, and a family fracture had become official protocol. The public did not see the file, the meetings, or the private pain. They saw one image: Meghan's empty place on the royal event list. Meghan watched the coverage in silence, and every sentence seemed to harden something inside her. Commentators spoke of exclusion, discipline, and royal control, but none of them had sat with the message in their hands. None of them had felt the cold distance of a family decision written like an office notice. The palace response, a short official statement meant to control public understanding, said only that attendance at royal events remained subject to household protocol and the king's approval. Household protocol means the set of palace rules that controls who attends, where people sit, who speaks to whom, and how royal events stay orderly. That mattered because the palace was not denying the removal. It was defending the system that made it possible. Charles saw the front pages at breakfast and set his cup down untouched. The king had expected pressure. He had not expected the private weight of the order to become public judgment so quickly. One newspaper carried the words, "The King's Line," across its front page, with a stark image of a crossed-out place card beneath the headline. Outside Buckingham Palace, a small crowd gathered near the gates. Some quiet, some angry, some simply drawn by the shock of seeing a family fracture. Buckingham Palace, the monarch's main working headquarters in London, mattered in that moment because people did not gather there for gossip alone. They gathered there when they believed the crown itself had made history. Meghan listened as one broadcaster described the decision as not banishment, but a warning with a crown seal. The phrase traveled fast because it captured the mood perfectly. A crown seal, in simple terms, means the mark of royal authority that makes a decision feel official and final. Meghan understood the damage of those words. They made her removal sound measured, almost merciful, while her humiliation remained invisible. She turned away from the screen, but the story followed her through every headline. The palace had not only removed her from events, it had allowed the country to watch her absence become a symbol. Charles understood the same thing from the other side of the storm. Broadcasters framed the breach as a collision between personal grievance and institutional discipline, and the monarch knew why that framing mattered. If the public believed he had acted out of anger, the crown would look cruel. If the public believed he had acted out of duty, the family wound would still look necessary. Neither version felt gentle. Both versions left scars. The noise grew, then sharpened, then began to reveal the real meaning of the order. This was no longer about one reception, one warning, or one empty seat. It was about what the monarchy believed it had to become in order to survive. Colder, clearer, harder to bend. And when the noise finally settled, only one question remained inside the palace. Not what was lost, but what the crown decided was worth protecting. In the end, the decision did not feel victorious. It felt heavy. Charles had protected the institution, but he had done it by wounding the family again. Meghan had been removed from royal events, yet the deeper loss was not a seat at a service or an invitation to a reception. It was the final proof that inside the monarchy, belonging could be conditional, and protocol could become the language of heartbreak. Charles sat alone after the final briefing, and relief never came. The king had done what his advisors believed was necessary, but necessity did not make the room feel lighter. The removal order, a formal instruction keeping Meghan away from selected royal events, now stood as one of the clearest acts of his reign. It mattered, because Charles had shown the palace, the public, and his own family that royal discipline would come before family repair. A reign, in simple terms, is the period when a monarch rules, and this moment would mark his with painful clarity. He had protected the crown, but he had not healed the people around it. Meghan accepted the reality with wounded pride, and that pride became her shield. She understood the consequence completely now. She would remain outside selected events, unless she accepted the conditions attached to any future attendance. Those conditions meant she would have to acknowledge the breach, follow event restrictions, and stop challenging direct commands inside royal spaces. The palace had not left room for confusion. It had chosen control over reconciliation. Meghan could feel the finality of that choice, not because every door was locked forever, but because every open door now came with a warning. Harry stood with Meghan personally, and that decision settled the emotional truth of his place. He still understood Charles more than he wanted to admit. The Duke knew his father had not acted carelessly. He knew the king believed the crown could not bend every time family pain demanded mercy. But understanding did not soften loyalty. Harry chose his wife, even while he saw that Charles would not weaken the monarchy to repair what had broken between them. That was the tragedy. No one left the story untouched. No one got the victory they wanted. William carried the consequence in silence. The prince saw a boundary drawn that he might one day have to defend himself. The future king understood that modern monarchy would not survive on affection alone. It would survive on rules, control, and the painful ability to say no. And that was the final verdict. The monarchy survived the breach by becoming colder, firmer, and more guarded, while the family inside it became more divided, more careful, and painfully aware that love alone cannot open every palace door. The order removed Meghan from the royal calendar, but its true legacy was larger. It proved that in the modern monarchy, the crown still protects itself first, even when the cost is paid in family silence. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.